How are you doing, ladies and gentlemen? This is Bilal of Real Talk with Bilal and Sean. Now, since it takes quite a lot of energy and time and coordination on the part of Sean and I, to record these hour-long podcasts that are obviously the signature of our channel, we have decided that it might be better to, in the time that is in between those podcasts, to record smaller episodes that might just be us on ourselves. So, I'll just be sitting at my desk at home, at my dining table, Sean at his desk at his dining table, wherever we feel comfortable. If we ever want to spitball for a little bit, we might just pull out one of these podcasts and just put them up online as soon as possible. Now, obviously, we have been in a little bit of a hiatus. This is just because of college applications for Sean and myself. He's applying to his colleges, I'm applying to mine. And because of that, we can't really meet up a lot of the time at the library where we usually record, and we just can't get the time together. We have all the research we need for the next couple of episodes done. We did that over the summer, so that's great. We'll be getting those to you guys as fast as possible. For right now, we thought it would be a good idea to just record some of the pieces that we've written on ourselves, by ourselves, and put those online. So just to get us started, I'm going to be writing my analysis of War of Wars by Robert Harvey. So I think it's good to begin with the Palace of Versailles, because the Palace of Versailles is an absolutely beautiful place and complex. And I use that term specifically. It is complex. It spins and twirls, it intertwines and stops with grace. It's a dance of architecture, to say the least, a love song to what it means to be royal. Yet its history is just as complex as the building itself. You see, many people see pictures of the front facade of the palace, where the main structure, which would be the palace proper, stands high and dominating. Now, around it are various buildings, which mean, in comparison to the palace, nothing. They stand in the wake of Versailles' own personal, intimate God. At the Versailles gift shop, it's in a quaint little building right off to the side of the palace entrance, to the right of it, if you're looking from the perspective of the palace. My eye was caught by the cover of a book written by Robert Harvey titled The War of Wars, The Epic Struggle Between Britain and France. I asked my dad to buy it. He said, hell no. It's Europe. Obviously, the costs get quite expensive when the conversion is accounted for. But sure enough, I pushed, and by the time we got stateside, he conceded and had ordered me my copy on Amazon. Thank you, Dad. After seeing it for the first time, and before ordering it, however, I looked up some reviews. Now, this book was released quite a while ago, so these reviews were quite old. But one particular review stood out in my mind for how critical it was of the work's portrayal of the events and people, most notably that of the portrayal of Napoleon Bonaparte. I still gave the general idea that the book should be read, though, so order it I did. And now here we are. Now, I'm not here to review the work itself or become an architectural critic of the palace, but I found The War of Wars, The Palace of Versailles, and Monroe Price's review of The War of Wars as a nice backdrop to what I will be discussing today, which is our own modern War of Wars, the War on Terror. Now, I would like to think that I write often. I would like to think that I think often. I definitely cry often. I hope that I decipher often and that I decipher well. I discuss often, as you guys know. But the one thing I always do is live in, of, and about the War on Terror. The reason being, I know nothing else besides that. I've been part of the War on Terror my entire life, so of course this is going to be what I dwell on for most parts of my time, because it's all I've been exposed to. Every part of politics, of everyday life, of school, of everything that we do deals with how we can win the War on Terror. How can we use our economics? How can we use our foreign relations? How can we use this country, this politician, that diplomat, whatever it may be, the end goal. How can we win the War on Terror? But if the War of Wars serves as any source of guidance, which it most definitely does, it warns that our current course of action cannot be how we leave the Middle East with a democracy in our wake. Now, in the 2007 review, written by Monroe Price, as I mentioned, the novel's description of Napoleon is the part most critically attacked. The question I ask, though, is have we created our own Napoleon? And to answer this question, we need to answer another. What does War of Wars tell us about post-revolutionary France? Now, Robert Harvey describes the situation. Quote, peace was as popular among ordinary Frenchmen as among the English. Many considered Napoleon's great achievement to have been his decisive administration after the years of bloodshed and the years of alleged corruption under the Directory. Quote. He goes on to say, quote, more radically, he created the Bank of France, which controlled the money supply as well as issuing its own credit. Quote, Harvey makes it clear that in the new world that Napoleon had created, a restoration of peace, even if it was intentionally momentary for him to regain the trust of the people, was necessary. He does note how the ultimate plan of Napoleon was to be the grand conqueror, a new Khan, a new Alexander. In fact, Price notes this, quote, Napoleon emerges not as a practical statesman or soldier, but as a partly crazed adventurer who saw himself as a second Alexander, the conqueror of the new world, of the known world. Quote, the various idiosyncrasies of Napoleon means that, for the war on terror, there is no one Napoleon. Rather, Americans have put a succession of presidents into our own Palace of Versailles in Washington that show us where destiny will ultimately guide the hand of liberty to our ultimate fate. Across the Hudson, across the Atlantic, and into the cities that Alexander, that Napoleon, so many centuries ago, had themselves conquered and supposedly liberated. Now, when the Twin Towers fell, when I was a mere baby, Bush stood on a burning fire truck, giving hope to a nation that had wept for days with no end in sight. So our leader, courageous and bold, heard us. He heard what it meant to us. He wept with us. When the monuments of democracy fell, it required a new sort of leader. President Bush gave a speech to a nation warming our hearts. Quote, I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear from all of us soon. Quote, that's what I remember of the Bush presidency. That's what my father remembers. I asked my father, what quote do you remember from presidents? He thinks of George H.W. Bush, no new taxes, He thinks of Bill Clinton, the joke. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. He can't think of one for President Obama. He can't think of one for Trump. He only knows the cliches. But the longest quote that I've heard him say from a president is, I hear you, the world hears you, and soon the people who knocked these buildings down will hear from all of us. He remembers Bush. And at that point in history, that's all America needed to hear. So we readied our battlements, we fastened our bayonets, and aimed our horses of steel east. President Bush knew that he was going to have to change his entire presidency as soon as the second tower was struck. This president that formerly focused on American development, infrastructure, education, and the economy now needed to look at how to cauterize the wounds of a grieving nation with a burning anger. He knew this, as evident with his own speech given to the nation right after the terrorist attacks. Now, the speech that I quoted earlier was like a couple days after the attack, when he was at Ground Zero. This is his formal address to the nation, which was given that night. Quote, America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Quote. That's a beautiful quote. At the same time, with this glowing rhetoric, remember that the people would soon hear from us. So in many ways, President Bush was starting to understand the reality that he now lived in. America, in order to protect itself, needed to spread our ideology. So then did Napoleon, at least from Price's view. As he says of Napoleon, quote, although acknowledging Napoleon's mystical sense of his own destiny, many historians maintain that for most of his career he was guided by rational and often laudable aims, such as introducing enlightened reforms in the countries he conquered. Quote, Napoleon's different interpretations show the different presidents we have had and the rationale for their reaction. In this first interpretation, the classical view of an emperor with the classical view of the good old Texas boy, we have leaders that want to spread ideals of democracy across a continent for the ultimate goal of self-preservation. If Napoleon failed to create at least a ring of democratic states to surround his own, the invasions would never have stopped. Likewise, President Bush understood the reality of his situation, that being the post-9/11 world, and needed to end the source of terror at its core. And so both wars began. A war to secure democracy in Europe, as Napoleon supposedly fought, and a war to secure democracy in the Middle East, as George Bush presumably fought. So then, as I said, the wars began. And so the portrayals of Bush as a warmonger, trying to destroy an entire region. I don't even need a source for this. I've been quoting Monroe Price's piece. I've been quoting The War of Wars. I've been quoting Bush himself. But to say that people did not call Bush a warmonger is to be an idiot, to be quite frank. Everyone knows that people were calling Bush a warmonger. At least later on, after his presidency had ended. So people acted like he was trying to become some sort of legend in his domination and submission of an entire region. As Price reflects on Napoleon, shows the second interpretation of war leadership. The first is a necessary authoritarian needed to secure peace. Now this is the second version of what a leader is. Quote, on one level, Napoleon's expedition to Egypt was a coherent, if far-fetched plan to cut his British enemy off from her Indian empire. But on another, it was something far more alarming. In Egypt, he remarked on his return, I was full of dreams. I saw myself founding a religion, marching into Asia, riding an elephant, a turban on my head, and in my hand the new Quran that I have composed to suit my needs. Quote, the leader who had started off by trying to spread democracy and liberate the world has succumbed to megalomania, trying, instead of for democracy, for dominance. President Obama needed to be a near-perfect continuation of this, as his original idealism was forced to give way to dealing with the destroyed economy, and then with a further collapsing Middle East. Now, President Obama had little over a year before the Middle East just started to descend into its own war of wars with the devolution known as the Arab Spring. Now, Harvey gives a description of France immediately prior to the renewal of armed conflict in Europe. So now you're going to draw these parallels. The renewal of conflict in around France and the renewal of conflict in the Middle East after we had supposedly ended it. Quote, the hurricane that was about to descend on Europe was the product of years of evolution, preparation, and training. A military machine equipped with revolutionary new tactics had been prepared to wreak havoc against the traditional armies of Europe. Quote, and then later on he goes on to say, quote, sooner or later he intended to fight, and although war was forced upon him more quickly than he expected, he now headed an engine of war of fearsome magnitude, speed, force, maneuverability, motivation, and innovation. Quote. And that last part, he's talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. So, now going back to President Obama had little choice when it came to the Middle East. Once again, with the necessity of protecting the mainland United States, he was forced to face the cards he was dealt. Call for wars on the 1% on the home front, and a 1% chance of winning a war in the Eastern Front. And with a war machine in America eerily similar to what Harvey described in revolutionary France, the population was primed for the Napoleon of war. Unrelenting, unbridled war. It was ready, and then it pounced at its opportunity when businessman Donald John Trump announced his candidacy for president. He campaigned on war, on diplomacy at the same time though, on making sure his administration had the best people. He would drain the swamp, believe me, and that's just what America wanted. In times of crisis, it wants the Napoleon of vision, of dignity. At the same time, it wants the likes of a Napoleonic code, however flawed, comparable to the Affordable Care Act. Other times, it wants a strong defense, one which Bush showed in his speech at Ground Zero. And at times like we're on right now, it wants the Napoleon ready to wage an endless war against. Now, this is my thing. Who exactly? Who does Donald Trump want to wage war against? He says illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants who? From Mexico, yes, but how are you going to deal with them? There's no plan, just emotion. He wants to stop refugees. Refugees from everywhere? From Burma? From Syria? From Malaysia? From every country where there's prosecution? If China tomorrow invaded Taiwan and there were Taiwanese immigrants, what would he say? Because he's doing it based off emotion, just like Napoleon. He's saying, we need to do this, we must do this, let us do this. And that's what Trump has over Napoleon. You see, Napoleon understood that he could, if he played all of his cards right and got a bit lucky, conquer Europe. He could do that. Militarily possible, okay? It would be unstable, but he could do that. During his time, in fact, he got damn near close to it. But whether or not he did is besides the point. What is important is that he had placed a physically tangible, possible goal before him. He had an end goal, and if he reached it, he would be satisfied, probably. Now, obviously, Russia is the one exception, but as you can see, in between the different phases of the Napoleonic Wars, once he had what he felt he could control with at the time being, he was fine with that. He was fine with that. But we don't know what Trump's end goal is, and that's the problem. So for Napoleon, once people realized that it was impossible to defeat, say, Russia, the morale disappeared and his support dissipated. That's what happened to Napoleon. Now, for a brief moment, it returned during his return to France, but even that was not able to keep him as a glorious figure. He was hailed the emperor simply because they had hated the king so much. Just the way that Trump is hailed so highly by certain members of the right because they hated Obama so much. So for Napoleon, the two things he hated were possible to destroy. He could topple kings and conquer nations. But for Trump, it's not possible. What he wants to do is continue the war of wars of his predecessors, the war on terror. Well, you can't stop that completely, can you? The war is continuous. On top of that, he leads the right in his war against liberalism. Once again, he's trying to attack an ideology. He doesn't say, oh, liberals are bad. He says liberalism is bad. You can't stop liberals. You know, he says that, oh, I'm going to work with them. I'm going to have the best deals. But at the same time, it's indeed a very thinly veiled disguise. He just wants to attack what it means to be liberals. Why do you think the term like liberal tears has come about? Because he's attacking the ideology, not the people. And as we know with our wars in the Middle East, as we know as European nations tried to squash France, you can't stop an ideology. You can't destroy a thinking, a thought process. You can't destroy what people hold dearly in their hearts. So yes, Napoleon was defeated in the same way that Obama and his ideology of liberalism was defeated. But the thing is, you can't destroy that. You can't destroy that. Now, so whilst Napoleon could, if everything on his side, achieve his goals, Trump cannot. So that leaves us with Trump, ready to wage an endless conflict, and one he will never be able to win. Thank you for your time. This has been the first, as I said, of a podcast that we will be doing on our own. This is just around, it looks like 17 minutes. Thank you, Anaga, for recommending that we do shorter versions so you could listen to it. This is not exactly short, but it is not an hour long. So with that, thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back for more later on. Thank you.